Hello, everybody, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, Master of Lore and Storyteller Extraordinaire. Now, every DM out there, every storyteller, every MC, whatever, again, what title that you might decide to go by while you're running the various games for your friends and players, is uh, is going to inevitably have or will run into a moment where they go, ugh. I didn't think about that very well, did I? There's always going to be a little whoopsie that happens. Something that doesn't just quite go according to plan, or the plan that you laid out and so carefully and meticulously plotted and set up and got everything prepared for ahead of time, you realize, that wasn't a good decision. Case in point, a friend of mine was running a campaign as Pathfinder set in the Faerun setting. We were all in Waterdeep, starting off as relatively brand newish characters. We were like level 4, if I remember right. And we spend our first day in Waterdeep. It's relatively normal, or at least as normal as the antics of a bunch of adventuring characters can ever be, suplexing great white sharks included. And well, most of us head to this tavern, and I'm running a cross-class monk and gunslinger character named Tick. His brother Talk, being run by another friend. They're both monks following the path of mirth, spreading joy, laughter, and happiness to everybody. And they're both manic depressives, and they switch off on who's Tick and who's Talk, who's upbeat and happy, and who is horribly, horribly wallowing down in the depths of depression. And well, while all this is going on, there's a rain of cannon fire descending down upon the docks and the city of Waterdeep. Small pirate fleet has made their way in, blasted their way through the ships that run a little picketing perimeter defending the city of Waterdeep, and well, pirates start raiding the towns. And the captain comes to shore. Not only does he come to shore, he walks into our tavern right in the middle of all the shelling and cannon fire raining out onto the towns. That was a bit odd. Not only that, but the captain was right in the middle of a bunch of adventurer characters. Not that he would know that, but still the DM knew this, and it's like, he came alone and is in the middle of about 6 of us. That also seemed a bit odd. But the best part was, amidst all the antics of the player characters, the DM had forgotten one very important thing. That in particular, Tick, my character, had done was, for those of you that don't know, and are new to the show or too young, um, when it comes to opiates and them being placed in alcoholic drinks, say kegs of beer, it really the alcohol just really, really, really magnifies the effect, kind of dangerously so. And well, DM had forgotten that Tick had done this and grabbed a big old stein of beer, started chugging a bunch, and then I politely reminded the DM about what happened, and his jaw dropped. Oh no, you're right. Fortitude save, fortitude save. He's got to make a fortitude save. It's like, okay. He rolled and got a 1. And we know he rolled a 1 because, well, our group, we've never really used GM screens. This is one instance where that may have been useful for the DM to kind of fudge the dice a little bit. But yeah, so the entire, or the pirate captain of the entire little mini pirate fleet besieging Waterdeep and looting and raiding deep into the town as a prelude to much, much bigger things to come later in the campaign was standing on stage, slurring his words, barely remembering why the hell he was even there in the middle of a bunch of adventurer characters. We didn't kill him right away. We thought we'd go take him and collect the bounty on him, escort him along while his mind was just blitzed and out on the very fraying edges of consciousness. And made it most of the way before we ended up having to kill him. He kind of went down in about 2 shots. Critical hits and power attack, what have you. But being, this was a whoopsie. This was a bit of a whoopsie. It's actually a culmination of a couple of different mistakes that kind of happened right there. And as the DM, as the storyteller running the campaign, what do you do when the whoops happens? What do you do when you make a grave tactical error? Well, in this particular case, the DM, since we're running in a fantasy setting, uh, very cleverly decided at the time of the by the time the next session rolled around, ah, that wasn't actually the captain. That was a doppelganger disguised as the captain, functioning as the captain while the captain was safely away leading um, leading a raid elsewhere. This way, this pirate captain had this fearsome reputation of just seeming to be everywhere at once. His ship flying across the waters much faster than could possibly be imagined. So this is how the captain was pulling it off. He had a doppelganger that would assume his form and operate and function essentially as him, which actually turned out to be a very clever bit of storytelling, and it added something to it, and also it made our characters look like we had just tried, or actually had just successfully scammed the guard captain of Waterdeep out of a considerable amount of money for the reward of this dead captain. So it was a very clever move in this particular instance, but um, this is just one of many different things that you can do when you have that little oops moment kind of happen over the course of running your game. And really, it can come at any angle. You can have everything plotted out perfectly, and those dastardly players will still find a way to throw a wrench into the gearworks and muck up the whole framework and machine of everything that you've got in play. So, what are some other ways that we have here? What are other tools that we have at hand? Well, the whole doppelganger shape changer thing is actually incredibly useful. There's another instance where we see this happening, and that's on the Acquisitions Incorporated, the C team, in their latest run right now, the Town of Promise series that they've got going. That bunch of episodes. There's an instance where a bandit leader ends up getting captured because a paladin uses the command spell on him, and uses a couple of other different effects. Actually, I think it might have been a unique ability uh, within the game, and basically Dinar Blitzen, Janari Prince, Dragonborn Paladin, ended up just kind of really just mentally dominating and seizing control of the character, which, well, the DM Jerry ended up making that's like that's actually a doppelganger, and it gets revealed later on in the series. Which, by the way, if you haven't gone and watched that yet, I'd wholeheartedly recommend it. Go over to Penny Arcade TV. It's right here on YouTube. Wonderful series, great to watch, definitely hilarious, and a whole lot of fun. With that little blurb out of the way now, let's get back to it. The doppelganger move is definitely a sensible choice. The doppelgangers are intelligent. They can read thoughts so that they can learn the thought and speech patterns of the people that they go to imitate. And they just work really well in this role. But like with anything else, any of these other tools in your arsenal, you don't want to use it too much, because if you use it at every turn, every single time that you make a mistake, it just really gets old, and it makes the players feel like, oh, it doesn't matter how clever we are, how smart we are, or whatever advantages that we latch onto. It's just going to be thrown back in our faces with, oh, that really wasn't the main bad guy. Oh, you didn't really succeed. Ha ha ha. It just kind of cheapens it all, and it makes everything feel futile if you keep doing it. And the same will be true of any of these other solutions to those little whoopsie moments that you might have. Another great option, if your table runs with a GM screen, and most do, is to just kind of fudge the dice a little bit. That thing is up there for a reason, to help block the view of the dice. It also typically will have or relay a bunch of the general rules and mechanics information that you might need to know right off the top of your head, and it saves you a couple of minutes of cracking open the books and digging through everything. It doesn't stop it all the time. That's still bound to happen, but it gives you good information and it also just keeps the players from seeing what exactly is happening and also kind of helps block your notes a little bit. Again, in my group, we've never really run with the GM screen at all, and I've had one moment or two where some of those crooked little buggers ended up either taking a look at my computer screen or at my notes and just kind of tried to skip ahead and see what was going to be coming their way and force me to adapt a little bit more. But that's neither here nor there. GM screen can be really useful, but again, you don't want to fudge the die results too often. I mean, because if you keep doing it and skewing everything in your favor to keep things on track, the players will start to notice that statistically, the odds of you constantly succeeding like this, you've either really stacked them up against encounters, characters, and creatures that are way out of their league, or you're screwing with the dice results. If you do use this option of fudging the die results, maybe consider every so often fudging it in the player's favor, just so that way they can have that moment of feeling like they've succeeded, or that the better yet, that their opponent, despite their best efforts, has actually ended up failing. I've done this once or twice myself, just because I thought, you know what, the story might be more interesting if we go this way, and I've had to adjust my plans on the fly because of my own whims regarding the course of gameplay. You can lay out the grandest, most epic, and flawlessly detailed campaign ever. And once you start playing, you might realize, oh crap, this is actually more interesting if things kind of go this way. That's an unexpected turn. Let's go down this turn and see where everything ends up. So be prepared to adjust your plans on the fly and be prepared to kind of fudge the dice not only in your favor but in the player's favor. Another great option for correcting a whoopsie or a mistake that may have ended up happening is to, well, I would actually say not correct it at all. Sometimes the unexpected happening, kind of like the earlier example with fudging the die results either in your favor or the player's favor, is to just let it ride, let things play out. Our DM certainly did that at first, but he had to come up with a much more clever way of making the story a bit more interesting because this pirate captain was important to a couple of different plot points later on in the adventure that he had in mind. Not everything was 100% charted out, but he still needed this NPC around, and so the doppelganger solution was the handiest one to have at the time. But there's still plenty of other solutions at hand here. If you're not playing in a fantasy setting, you can swap out Doppelganger for a body double. Certainly, with today's technology, makeup artistry, and all the different tools of the trade that are on hand, you can certainly come up with elaborate and fairly realistic looking body doubles in order to screw with the players and turn them about and also create a little bit of breathing room for yourself for those little moments where, whoops, you put the king right out front there with the pawns. Should have kept him back behind the lines a little bit. Um, but there's many great narrative options that you can use. And another great one, or at least it can be great, it's always everything is always going to depend on a little bit of context, but if one NPC that you brought out front that was supposed to be fairly important kind of gets taken out a bit early, either be due to poor planning on your part or just insanely good die rolls on the part of the players, well, you can always advance things a little bit. Again, this requires adjusting your plans, but if an NPC that you have gets taken out early and they're important to the plot, well, if you let it ride and you advance your plans a little bit, you can you can actually show and reflect that oh, this particular character, he's important to the plot because he's connected with this person and this thing that's going on. Well, the person that's the next step in the adventure is still going to need that first important NPCs activities to be follow through to completion. They're going to need to see those plans come to fruition and come out successfully. So they may step in themselves to try to ensure that their plan gets carried out successfully so that their own part of the plans, their own grand design, can follow through and be completed successfully. Larger organizations will try to fill the gaps with whatever capable employees or members that they may have on hand. They'll fill those gaps. They will try to keep this thing running. And that will also go a long way towards showing the players, hey, this organization really has some power behind it. They have the manpower, they have the capabilities, they have the resources necessary to keep this going through in spite of this what you had thought was a major stumbling block, this big stepping stone that you threw their way, that you leapt across. In spite of all of this, they're still going strong. Yes, it was a hiccup, but that's all this ended up being for them. And again, that can show the players that, yeah, this is an organization to be taken seriously and needs to be dealt with. We need to get to the next step in this. We need to get to this next link in this particular chain and see this entire plot undone and unraveled. Again, how you go about this just depends a little bit, but the, regardless of the campaign setting or the type of campaign you're going for, whether it's a combat themed or shadowy cloak and dagger espionage kind of campaign, following the links and chain is still going to be something that makes sense. You know, if you deal with the captain, then you're going to need to deal with the major, then the general, and so on and so forth. Dealing with a shadowy campaign's counterparts to what you might find in a more combat-oriented campaign. But again, this is just a small number of tools, and make sure you diversify your options a bit here. Fudging the die rolls will certainly help keep you on a nice, even platform as far as keeping the game going. But do it too much, the players are going to start to notice that you're screwing with the die rolls and kind of lose interest in the game because what's the point if you're just going to constantly keep skewing things in your favor? Same thing with using doppelgangers or body doubles. If you keep doing that and every single major opponent that they deal with is, oh, no, that was just another illusory bit. That was just another pawn that you chewed up. There's really no damage done. The real bad guy's way over here, safe and sound. Go get him. Your princess is in another castle, boys. That just gets to be frustrating, because there's no point in pursuing anything if the goalpost is going to keep getting moved back by the same mechanic and method every single time. And advancing your plans, that can certainly help with the narrative and it can certainly help keep the players from feeling frustrated. But if you're constantly always having to adjust your plans on the fly like this because you keep letting the players write out your mistakes, your little whoopsies, it gets to be a bit frustrating for you. And you have to keep rewriting things or adjusting things. And that's going to happen uh, plenty enough on its own, regardless of if of regardless of your own mistakes. The players are going to constantly be doing unexpected things, so you don't want to constantly be rewriting. So you have to find that nice balance and get things on a nice even keel between adjusting for the player's actions while keeping your own story intact and keeping that narrative flow going forwards over the course of your many sessions and gameplay moments. But um, there's a great deal more out there that you can do to help keep this going as well. This is just a small selection of some tools that I think personally are incredibly useful for this. Another one of my favorites. I especially like doing this for more combat oriented bosses, and that's using these characters like they're a summoned creature. Actually, that's exactly what I do. There's one particular instance, a handful of months ago or so, on one of those few occasions where I actually get to play or DM a game. In this case, I was DMing. It was this high fantasy steampunk setting that I keep rambling on about at random points. The players were making a raid on a warehouse, trying to find that next link in the chain for this large shadow organization that was trying to stir the pot between the orcs of Three Tusk Hold and the people of the Corvarian Empire. They made a raid on this warehouse where they knew lots of stolen goods, either coming from or going to the Three Tusk Hold, were being hoarded at. So if this is a point where all this loot's being kept at, then there's got to be somebody in charge of either redistributing it or making sure it stays under lock and key or whatever it is they're doing. There's got to be somebody on hand managing all this incoming loot and ill-gotten gains. So their mission was to try to find and capture this person and get as round up as many documents as possible before they potentially ended up being destroyed. Well, as they're making their way through this maze-like corridor of crates, barrels, boxes, and all this stolen loot, and they're fighting their way through all the NPCs, the guards, the sharpshooters that are in place, trying to pick them off. They fight their way through, and they get to this big encounter point where there is this this platform with a Gatling gun on the back, mounted on top of it, and firing away at them. This well-dressed figure shows up, broad-brimmed hat, big plume coming off of it, shows up and goes, "Ah, troublemakers. I do so love me some troublemakers," and draws out his rapier and starts going to town on the players. Again, the fighter character in the group had plate armor, and I designed this particular NPC little mini boss challenge with him in mind. The NPC was a duelist, if I'm remembering correctly. Don't have the notes on hand at the moment, but he had abilities that let him overcome that higher armor class from the plate armor and the shield as well. And he was able to deal damage to them. And one thing that the players noticed as combat wore on was that this particular enemy didn't seem to mind or care about the damage being dealt to him. He felt it, but it wasn't paid any mind. And once they reduced him to 0 hit points, he just kind of poofed and faded away. And that's because he had been linked to a summon item that their target had used. The target had activated this item and summoned this particular character to the location to fight for them. I got the idea from a second edition spell that essentially let mages summon another adventuring party as a group of adventurer characters. You'd summon them in, and they would fight for you, and they would have all the abilities that similar adventurer characters would have. They'd be wizards, clerics, fighters, rogues, etc., etc. Whatever combination of classes. I don't remember all the details of the spell offhand, but that was the inspiration for this. In this particular case, the item was set up that this particular character would be keyed to the item, and once the item was activated, he'd be summoned to the location to fight on behalf of his summoner. So it it allowed me to introduce this particular combat boss and throw him into combat with. While there was a certain amount of tactical consideration thrown into it, he could still fight with a certain amount of reckless abandon without concern about whether or not he needed to be healed or somehow taken care of or supported over the course of the fight. And once he was beaten, well, he just would disappear from the battlefield and go back to wherever it was he had been summoned from, safe and sound, alive and healthy, and he comes away with a great deal of knowledge about the characters coming after him and the organization he's ostensibly a part of. He knows how they fight, well, knows more about how they fight, what their capabilities are, how skilled they are, their their relative number, and the types of resources, at least the types of resources that they brought to bear in this particular combat situation. It's a great deal of knowledge to come away with, and you as a DM now have an in-game story method, a story explanation for how the organization ends up responding to the players. They they will come away with a greater deal of knowledge on how to tactically approach this particular group of adventurers, and you will force your players to grow and evolve as well, to evolve and change their tactics, to change their thinking, to change their own methodologies. And it's all in game and story. And it's one way that you can kind of correct for an oopsie if it turns out, oh, well, they shouldn't have killed that character. Wait, he was a summon. He was keyed to be a particular summon. But again, that's something that would work particularly better for a high fantasy sort of game where summoning like that is more is plausible. But it still is a solution and a rather effective one. In this particular instance, this was something I had actually planned and thought about ahead of time, but it's still a useful way, a useful tool for other DMs and storytellers to have in order to adjust and course correct in the case that they make a mistake where they play or place a particularly important character a little bit too far out front. Maybe they didn't intend for them to be beaten, or somehow the players trap the character from being able to escape. And it's like, ah, crap, how do I get him out of this? Wait, he's a summon. And poof, you have your explanation. Again, it's one of those things where you don't always want to do this, but it is helpful. And it is especially helpful if you want a particular villain or NPC to be a continuously recurring character over the course of a campaign or multiple campaigns and story arcs, depending on what it is exactly you're wanting to do. But, anyways, I have been Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire, here talking about a couple of different ways for you various DMs and storytellers out there to deal with your own little whoopsies and your own little tactical mistakes. Um, if you like this video, please hit like and subscribe. Also, click that bell icon to get notified when I have more content being uploaded here to the channel. I really just want to say thank you all so much for taking the time to watch this. It really means a lot to me to have even just right now the little bit of support that I do have on this channel. It's wonderful to see it growing, even if it's just tick by tick, person by person. I love every moment of it, and thank you all for taking the time. And please, if you have feedback for me, go ahead and leave it in the comments down below. I'm always open to it, whether it's good, bad, indifferent, or just absolutely sarcastic and snide remarks. I'm looking forward to seeing them all. Once again, thank you all for your time. Have yourselves a good night.